Welcome back, everybody. This is Cruising Podcast. I'm Sarah Gabrielli, and we have a longtime friend of the pod on the show today. Her name is Mandy Carter, and if you're an avid cruising listener, you already met her back in 2024 as part of our episode on San Francisco's iconic lesbian bar, Maud's Study. Mandy was the first person we connected with from Maud's, and always a community leader and champion for intergenerational connections and celebrating our history. She really took us under her wing and facilitated a lot of our other sources for that episode as well. You can hear some of Mandy's story in that Maud's episode, mostly as it centers around her journey to and with Maud's. But there's always been a lot more to her story, which became more and more obvious as I went on to interview her radical lesbian activist peers for this season of Cruising, and sometimes Mandy Carter would come up. Not only was she a regular and bartender at Maud's, but Mandy was also one of the most prominent Black lesbian activists of her generation. And that's a lot of what we'll talk about today. I did do another interview with Mandy this year for this episode, but I also wanted to include some stories from when we first met back in 2023. So this episode is really a patchwork of conversations from multiple interviews with Mandy over the years. You can, of course, go back and listen to our Maud's episode for more details on the bar's history and its owner, Ricky Stryker. Or you can pre-order our book, The Lesbian Bar Chronicles, anywhere books are sold or at cruisingpod.com/book. It comes out May 26th and features the story of Maud's as well as some of Mandy's own testimonial.
I was born November 2nd, 1948, with a brother 1 year older than Ronnie and a sister 2 years older. Our mother, after I was born, our mother left and never came back. We became wards of the state. We became orphanages, basically, the ward of the state of New York, at least for my first 18 years. And so with our mother leaving, literally, we were put in the Albany Children's Home, which is like an orphanage. Now I think they call them children home societies. There were maybe 60 or 70 children that were there. You have a foster parent. You had maybe 12 or 13 different people per dorm. You got, you did your meals. It was all under the auspices of the social services of the state of New York, SUNY, State University of New York. But the home got sold. And when the home got sold, they had to figure out what do they do with these 70 or 80 children. And because we were Black, they had a system where they had Black families who could take foster children. And this Black family who could take foster children were down in Chatham Center, New York, and they're Black and they're farmers. He said, good, we have a place to go. And plus we could stay together, Sarah, Ronnie, Dolores, and me. The farm, which is very interesting, especially back in those days, he had a cow and goats. And because he had goats, what do you think he had? You had anyone who can't drink cow's milk. He had a huge market because people could drink goat's milk. He was ahead of his time, but he also had a lot of chickens. And there was like these big chicken coops. He would get them you know how you have those little baby chicks that are real cute and fuzzy when they're yellow? Not when they get older, and not when you had to slaughter them for the market. And me, Ronnie, and Dolores had to do that. I couldn't do it. It was just too brutal for me.
So you had to work on the farm.
Oh yeah, but the thick chicken thing was just too much for me. And also, even though they had a toilet in the house, they had an outhouse that we all had to use, whether we liked it or not. And you have 4 seasons in Albany, New York, and Chatham Center. And so when it's freezing cold, you had to go out to that outhouse. Just think about that, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then something interesting happened. Dolores, she ended up going back to live with our father who lives in Harlem in New York. Somehow they had a different relationship. She never mentioned that to Ronnie and I. So they had their own personal conversation, Sarah. And all of a sudden, next thing we know, and I didn't get along with her, it didn't bother me, but she never told us. He never told us. And then she was gone. And I haven't been able to be in touch with her ever since.
That's crazy.
I didn't mind it because we did not get along at all. I think it was just your regular sister, elder citizen. Maybe it was just the 1 year difference, but I think it was the temperament. She was just always so moody and Yeah, have you ever met someone who's just always, "Oh, man," like, "No, I mean, I'm always smiling." It's just a different personality. It would come back to haunt me later, but I didn't know. There was no frame of reference there for that.
And then what happens for you?
Sadly, I got my period at 12. All of a sudden, the foster mother says, "I can't take care of you. I'm worried about you getting pregnant or whatever." So if you go Albany Children's Home, age 1 to 8, 8 to 12, Chatham Center in the Black foster family, and then 12 until 18 at the Schenectady Children's Home, which is still there. But what we didn't know was that when the Black foster family took us in, they had been doing that almost like regularly, consistently. They've been doing it for quite some time. Very few kids of color know where to get placed, and they were willing to take any Black children. But what the thing that I did not know when it came down as to why I was the one being removed to go to the Schenectady Children's Home, because I got my period and she was afraid that I might get pregnant. And that was the only reason. But how many other children had the same thing happen? But my brother got to stay because he was a boy. My brother got to stay. Dolores got shipped off, same thing. And that would just be happening. And if that's a policy within the social services is, that's just, they have no idea how destructive that is for people. And they have the foster parents, but they just said, well, it didn't work out, or, and I have to say real quick, I lost contact with Ronnie for 50 years.
That's terrible. We're going to get to that. But first, so you're 12, you're shipped off to the Schenectady Children's Home. And did you have any sense of your queerness at the time?
I had a feeling that I was not, let's say, the best way to describe it, I remember, I don't know if it was an attraction, but I remember a woman bumped into me and I said, "Oh, I don't know what that feeling is. I don't wonder what that is." I don't know. So we had like a card library in Mount Pleasant High School. I remember going up and looking the word, we didn't have the word gay, it was homosexual. And I was looking at the card file, like, I don't know what this is. No one talked about it. And then the card file had like the well of loneliness. And I remember not getting anything real out of it, but I just remember that feeling like, why did I feel like, that was kind of nice, whatever. But it wasn't until I legally turned 18 and then went to that first bar down in New York City. And that's when that's when it confirmed. And then I think I was using the word gay. I don't think we used the word lesbian. Everything was gay, Sarah. And then I realized, this is like interesting, by the time I got to San Francisco, I had no parents. I didn't have to worry about being out or not. There was no parents to worry about. And also, I have never slept with a man in my life. Never have, never will. But how many when you go, "Oh, yeah, I tried it." I said, "Why'd you bother? Who needs it? Don't care." I think there's a word for that. Isn't there a name for it?
Yeah, a gold star lesbian.
Yes, a gold, yeah. What was the point of that, man? Psst, no.
And then how do you get introduced to organizing and sort of like the kind of person that you become and the path that you go down?
Because in Mount Pleasant High School, I did not know it at the time, there was a teacher who was with the American Friends Service Committee, the Quakers. And he said, "We're going to bring someone in." You know how they bring people in to talk about different things. And they brought this young staffer, white, who came in and said, "Yeah, we are working on what's happening in the South with the civil rights movement. And by the way, we have an American Friends Service Committee high school work camp in the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania. Who would like to go?" I raised my hand. I got permission to go. And it was like a week-long camp up in the Pocono Mountains. It's still there. And because of that, that's the first time I heard the name Bayard Rustin. I had no idea who this person was. It's the first time I heard the name of Audre Lorde, because at the time of the Vietnam War, the only organization that was willing to talk about it, converse about it, advocate for it was the American Friends Service Committee, Catholic Worker, and some other groups. That changed my life, because at the peace camp, he said one thing that really struck me, the power of one, that each and every one of us, if we don't realize it or not, can impact change. Because most people tell you, that will never work. Oh, you need to have this many people. But then I thought, wait a minute, some of the best things happened because someone said, what if? What if I try that? But also I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be a doctor, and I aged out at 18. Where am I going to go? I have no money. I have nothing. But the home did something extremely important for me. The home said, "You know what, Mandy, because you want to be a doctor, and because we appreciate you, and you've been so good. We will pay for you if you go to medical school. We will pay for you. And I had to go to a junior college in Hudson Valley, and I liked it to begin with. But then I didn't like it anymore because I had already experienced a high school work camp, and I loved that way of learning and wanted to be an organizer. But when the home said, not only will we pay for you, but then if you decide you want to drop out, whatever, we'll give you sort of like some money just to go down, and we'll get money for a bus to go down to New York City. And they said, we'll also give you money to stay at a YWCA. So I had $80 in my pocket, took a bus down to New York City. I knew no one, got into the Y, walked the streets of New York City, slept in Central Park. But this is 67. It was like, the hippies and whatnot. That was just part of the hippie thing. It was fun. I had a sleeping bag, felt safe. And when my money ran out of the Y and I didn't have a job, that's when I started getting a little concerned. And I thought, what am I going to do? So after I ran out of money, I had enough time to go. I was sleeping in Central Park. It was, summer. It was safe. Then I ended up going down and sleeping on a bench at Washington Square Park because that's where a lot of people were going down there. And it was only by coincidence and only because I was walking down Hudson Avenue and there was a sign that said free lunch. Went in, met the folk there, and they said, Mandy, I'll tell you what. They needed someone to answer the phone because they had a phone line for people who were freaking out on LSD. You'd be on that phone line to help people come down from acid. And it was run by Timothy Leary. I am not kidding you. The League for Spiritual Discovery was run by Timothy Leary. And so my job for that summer, between the hours of 8 and night, 6 in the morning, if that little phone, the phone with the cord, my friends freaking out, what do we do? Vitamin D, vitamin B, and whatever, niacin, and come down. That was my job for the entire summer.
So was that the purpose of the group? Like is that what people were always calling about? Or like, can you explain what this group was for?
It was actually literally, it was a building in the East Village. And the building got set up specifically because when LSD hit, that came out of nowhere. It didn't start in San Francisco, it started in New York. But when people hitchhiked out, literally across the country, remember 67, the Summer of Love, they would hitchhike from New York to San Francisco, and they bought LSD and all the stuff that goes with that. And a lot of the performers were using it as well.
Was their purpose literally to help people that were having bad trips?
Yes.
Or that was the purpose of this league?
A combination of that and also letting people know. And they had a lot of contact with hospitals, too, because you had people flipping out, freaking out. So it was a combination of proactively thinking, explain what LSD is, what it does, and if you're on a bad situation, then we know how to bring you down. But a lot of people were mixing it with you had no idea. People started then mixing it with crack or some other stuff, and they would be on really bad trips. And all of a sudden, the hospitals in the East Village were wondering, why are we getting all these horrendous stories of people on bad trips? And some of those trips, where this building is, it literally is walking block down to the Hudson River. How many people did bad trip and ended up in that river? Because I wanted to be a doctor, that was kind of a part of the purpose for me to have another element of what I could help with, Sarah.
Yeah, it's a good fit for you.
Right. But also a lot of people were going to San Francisco. They were also going because it was the hippie thing. But a lot of people were going because they had more activism happening in the San Francisco Bay Area than they necessarily had in New York City, in the East Village.
People were just talking about San Francisco a lot.
Yes.
And so that's kind of where you got this idea of going there.
Yeah, but not only talking about it, but asking people specifically we invite you to come, not just because it's a great trip. We invite you to come because where are all the military bases that were sending all those people to Vietnam? San Francisco.
Then the end of the summer, you then decide to make your way to the West Coast with some friends, right? And so what happens on that road trip?
Well, the road trip was like everyone's taking Volkswagens, VW buses, and everyone was doing that. And
were you hitchhiking?
Yeah. But I wasn't the only one. There was 2 other good friends of mine who wanted to hitchhike out with me, and we went together as 3. You had Toshi, who was Japanese, Natalia, who was white, and Mandy, who's black. Have you ever been in the Holland Tunnel?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. You know how you get out of New York, you take the Holland Tunnel, and it takes you right up to where you stick your thumb out to hitch across country? There is a truck stop there. And we said, maybe we should get some sandwiches, something for the road. So we walk in, to the Holland Tunnel, this restaurant, and I walk in, Toshi walks in, Natalia walks in, the gentleman behind the counter, white, looked at me, looked at Toshi and Natalia, and he says, "We don't serve no colored people in here." And we said, "Colored people?" He said, "You any see any colored people here?" Only got that black guy behind the counter. Yeah, he's doing the dishes. That blew my mind because you're coming from hippie, say, all that love stuff, and then you're getting the reality of what it meant to hitchhike from New York City, literally at the Holland Tunnel, all the way across the country. And we have story after story of the good stuff that happened and the bad stuff that happened. But we're not the only one that experienced that. So that's story number one. Remember that, Holland Tunnel. We end up getting rides, and then we ended up getting to Chicago. We got off and we stopped at a restaurant, black restaurant in Chicago. We walk into there. The black gentleman behind the counter looks at me, looks at Toshi, looks at Natalia, and says, "We don't serve no white people in here." And I said, "Sorry?" He said, "You see any white people in here?" See what I mean? And that was the lesson. I said, we just went through that in New York. That was an aha moment. And how many people might have experienced that? It couldn't happen to a lot of people, but if a lot of people are traveling the country, these are those moments, these teachable moments, if I could use that term.
They end up defining your values and the way that you move through the world.
The other one has to be when we ended up in down in Los Angeles. And as we were going on the Pacific Ocean, people kept doing lists. And we said, "Are they giving us the finger?" It was the first time we saw the peace sign. Now think about the cultural shift that is to go from New York City to having people do this, and we didn't know what that was. That gives you an idea of just the incredible cultural stuff from New York to San Francisco, New York. And we said, no, that's the peace sign. What's that? I'm not kidding. Then we finally get up to Haight-Ashbury. We get to Haight-Ashbury. There's a Haight-Ashbury switchboard. Everyone's walking in bare feet. They're all doing this. And there was like the waffling of incense. We get to the Haight-Ashbury switchboard. The three of us walk in. Someone was sitting on a little desk and they had a Rolodex. Anyone walked in, they said, "Well, we're trying to find a place to stay." The Rolodex card was full of people who were offering places for people to stay if they came into San Francisco. And the first name we pull up is Vincent O'Connor of the Catholic Peace Fellowship. Catholic Peace Fellowship, that's the people operating in terms of opposition to the war in Vietnam. And the fact that all three of us got to go to his house, the house is still there. And because I got to go to his house, we stayed there. Woody Guthrie dies. During that time, they're having a concert in downtown San Francisco. I go. It's the first time I saw Joan Baez, Mimi Farina in concert. It was free. Come out of the theater, run into her, and I said, "I just heard about you, at this American Friends Service High School work camp that I went to." She said, "You might want to apply to come to the Institute for the Study of Nonviolence." I applied and I got to go. And I went with Vincent O'Connor. Had I not pulled that Rolodex card to go with Vincent O'Connor, who was the Catholic Peace Fellowship, a draft resistor around the Vietnam War, I wouldn't have gone to that concert. I wouldn't have applied to the Institute. I wouldn't have met Joan, going to jail because of the war in Vietnam, and then meeting Jane Shulman. Jane Shulman invites me to go to a potluck. I get my first job at WRL. That is literally how that journey happened. Had we walked in 10 minutes earlier or 10 minutes later, it could have been someone else. But on this particular moment, the card they just happened to pick that person at that time was Vincent O'Connor, because he put his name and said, "If anyone comes and needs a place to stay, they can stay at my house at blah, 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 blah." That's what I meant, the importance of that, pulling that particular card at that particular moment. Because had he not, we probably would not be having this conversation with you, because of that Rolodex card led to this thing that happened, that thing that happened, that thing that happened. And because the Catholic Peace Fellowship also had a relationship with the War Resisters League that was also in San Francisco at the same time, the Institute was one of the places where they were training. They were training for the first ever nonviolent civil disobedience action at the Oakland Induction Center that was going to happen. And so Vincent also, as a draft resistor, he knew we would probably end up going to jail too, because it wasn't like evading the draft by going to Canada or trying to find someone to get out of the draft. They were directly involved in draft resistance, which meant that as an individual man who said, I'm not going to serve in the military. I'll do draft resistance. You can go to trial and you end up going to jail for being a resistor. In October of 1967, that was the first official Stop the Draft Week across the country. It literally was called Stop the Draft Week across the country. That's when the Institute for the Study in Carmel Valley with Joan Baez and Ira Sampearl and whatever, they partnered with the Catholic Peace Fellowship, and that's when they did their first ever sit-in at the Oakland Induction Center in October. They got like maybe 5-day sentences, whatever. But they then turned around and wanted to do it again in December. And when they did it again in December, then they went to 10 days, 14 days. And I did not sit in October. I went over to the induction center and watched everyone sit in and whatever. But then they said, we're going to do it again in December. I said, this time I want to join them. And that's when I went up and got arrested. There was maybe 30. So all the women went to Santa Rita women's side. All the men went to the Santa Rita men's side. You know, the jail, when I say jail, it's not like a jail with you know how you see a jail with the bar cells? No, this is it's almost like a summer camp. I mean, I don't know how to describe it, dorms, whatever. So when I went and got arrested December 67, that was my first official arrest. That's when I met Jane Shulman. And that's when she said, hi, my name is Jane Shulman. Have you heard of the WRL? I'd like to invite you to a potluck. That was the thing that was the game changer. Remember, I got arrested in 67, got my first job at WRL in 1969, only because of my arrest and Jane's connection. But then got arrested again at the war in Vietnam always had these U.S. aircraft carriers. You might have seen them. They're huge. They sit off the coast of Vietnam and they fire all these weapons and whatnot. So Oakland has the induction center, but they're not far from Oakland. There's an Alameda Naval Air Station. That's where the U.S. aircraft carriers were stationed. That's when we did another arrest, literally on the tracks of the Alameda Naval Air Station. That's when we got the 90 days. 90 days. 10 days is one thing. It's the same routine, even though you've got 90 days. It was much longer. But I'll tell you what I did differently on the 90 days. When we did it the first time, a lot of white, no shade, because that's who got arrested, majority white women. Because, 99% of the prison population in Santa Rita with the men are mostly black women and black men. They can't afford cash bail. That's who's there. The same thing is true now. I only state that because a lot of the black women were wondering, well, why are you as a black woman, what you doing in here? They asked that, but then when I said, we're here because of the war in Vietnam, and they said, oh my God, that's when they said, wait a minute, that's my husband, boyfriend, cousin, because you know what the system was doing? If you were black, male, you got arrested, they would give you an option. You can go to jail or we can put you in Vietnam, and a lot of them took the option to go to Vietnam. Think about that reality. And what did that mean about who was on those front lines? This is all so connected. And that's when they said, oh my gosh, and then I realized now, and then all of a sudden, a lot of the white women, they might have looked at it, they said, no, we think we have something in common. That changed the dynamic in that prison because white women and black women are saying the same thing. This war is so wrong. And what do we do about it? So that I get chills around that because that was the game changer. And you know what else happened? In the beginning, when we got there, they only played soul music all the time on the radio. It was on there 24/7. At one point, one of the white women, and we got together and said, well, do you mind if we maybe try some classical music for a change? I'm not kidding. They said, let's try that. And also the meals that we had, the meals were always like, Wonder Bread, you could take a whole loaf and, make it into like a little ball. They said, well, what about if we try to maybe can we order some whole wheat bread? I'm not kidding. It was just this wonderful kind of, well, what about that? Let's try that. So what went from, who are these people, to, well, let's have that. It was just amazing, and then the music and then, so that wouldn't have happened if we didn't have an interesting mix of people trying to have this cultural conversation. And what we had in common was war was so wrong. And why are our men and women and our children being the ones that have to pay the price?
What was that like for you, like deciding for the first time to put yourself in this position and to be in that space? Can you talk about that?
I had no family, so I didn't have to worry about being. Some people said I can't do that, and I can't, And also, I didn't care about being out as a lesbian, but it was because Bayard, who was gay, and said if you can be gay or lesbian or whatever, don't go, and if you can be out, please do it for those who can't. And so I was willing to be a face and a voice, but not just me. But the Quakers were one of the few groups at the time, Sarah, that were willing to be stepping out and saying, if you're gay or lesbian, whatever, war is wrong. And if you want to speak out, and then we have to speak out to the people who said they can't be out. But I had no fear. That's what I'm trying to say. There was no concern. There was no pressure. In fact, I felt almost compelled to do it because of the high school experience. Who were going to be the person who were willing to be out there to say, I can do this, please join me.
In 1968, you then end up in D.C. for a protest, right?
Well, King was talking about the war in Vietnam. But then because he was giving that speech, August 23rd, 1967, on the Mall, the famous I Have a Dream speech, that's when he talked about the consequences of war and what people could do to resist it. And resisting was either being a conscientious objector, or if you feel like you want to then talk about the possibility of going to jail and committing nonviolent civil disobedience, you can do that. Now, when you're on the Mall and you're looking at the Lincoln Memorial, and if you look on the right-hand side, he then said we might want to do a thing called the 1968 Poor People's Campaign. 1968 Poor People's Campaign was based on the idea of how any person, power of one, can figure out of their own individual removal of their person, their individual accountability about war. And at the time, it was taxes, it was selective service, it was because your father went or your mom went or whatever the circumstance. Or for some people, you couldn't even get you couldn't get into college without serving in some kind of military capacity.
Then personally, you end up in D.C. at the National Mall for this Poor People's Campaign, correct?
Yes, because King had called for that march. He had called for the march in Washington to organize against the war in Vietnam. And he said, if you're living anywhere and if you want to be a part of that, please get next to whoever else might be organizing for it, and then organize buses to come to and then arrange for that to happen on the dates of August 27th and August 28th. And it wasn't until I did that march across the country, and across the country we would stop at different places, Sarah. Because you can't
so you marched across the country?
No, we rode on buses across the country.
Okay,
we rode on buses from San Francisco to get to Washington, D.C., and we always stopped at the bus stops. There was one city where all of a sudden we had agitators who were up in opposition to the March on Washington, where they were trying to figure out ways of what they could do to taunt the buses. Some of them would have been putting nails in the road, and when we stopped at a rest stop, some of them were literally trying to figure out ways they would either start yelling at you or sneaking up. And when you go to a rest stop, they have areas for the trucks and the buses, and they would sneak up and try to tap on the bus or really just like to make sure we couldn't get any sleep, and they were just being like agitators. I don't know how else to describe it, but that happened all along the route. And then, of course, you have the Amtrak station in downtown Washington, D.C., and that's where the mall, where we had Resurrection City.
Can you describe the tent city and what it was like?
Yes, that's what I'm going to do right now.
Okay.
Now, you know where the Lincoln Memorial is.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And if you know where the Lincoln Memorial is, if you stand at the top of the stairs and then look at the center of where the Washington Monument is, literally right down the mall, on the right-hand side, that literally was where all the organizing was happening. That's where we ended up doing the Poor People's Campaign city, not even a city, it was just tents. And then we ended up going from tents to building these, they're not shacks, but they're like sheds. I don't know how else to describe it to you.
So this is kind of like MLK's last campaign that he's spearheading.
Sadly.
And what is the message of? Because it's sort of like it's organizing against poverty, sort of. Is that the message?
Jobs, because remember everything was segregated, and freedom meaning around literally economic freedom, racial freedom, ability freedom. That would be the best way to describe it. We welcome everyone and we'll do anything we can socially, culturally, whatever the legislative thing to ensure that it can happen. And again, probably the key would be the power of one, that you, one person at a time, can make a difference. One step, one person.
How long did you stay in the tent city?
Well, actually, the tent city, it opened up on a certain date and it closed. It was only meant to happen, I think, for like 1 or 2 days. But then how do we make sure that people who want to learn more, who want to do more conversation because they can then go back home and then start organizing what's happening back home? Because it wasn't just in D.C. at that point. It was every place where there might have been no unions, no women, no whatever. They were figuring out the tools because every day you had like these classes. That's the best way I can know how to describe it.
There were like workshops at the tent city.
Yes.
That's cool.
Yes.
So it's like a consciousness raising kind of thing.
Yeah.
Starting or growing your own business can be intimidating and lonely at times. Your to-do list may feel endless with new tasks, and lists can easily begin to overrun your life. So finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything as a built-in business partner can be a game changer. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US. From household names like Gymshark, Rare Beauty, and Heinz, to brands just getting started. Shopify has hundreds of ready-to-use templates that can help you build a beautiful online store that matches your brand's style. And you can tackle all the important tasks in one place, from inventory to payments to analytics and more. No need to save multiple websites or try to figure out what platform is hosting the tool that you need. And if people haven't heard about your brand, you can get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you, with easy-to-run email and social media campaigns to reach customers wherever they're scrolling or strolling. Start your business today with the industry's best business partner, Shopify, and start hearing. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/realm. Go to shopify.com/realm. That's shopify.com/realm.
With Plan B emergency contraception, we're in control of our future. It's backup birth control you take after unprotected sex that helps prevent pregnancy before it starts. It works by temporarily delaying ovulation, and it won't impact your future fertility. Plan B is available in all 50 U.S. states at all major retailers near you, with no ID, prescription, or age requirement needed. Together, we've got this. Follow Plan B on Insta at Plan B One Step to learn more. Use as directed.
I'm Mandy.
And I'm Melissa, and this is Moms and Mysteries.
We're two Florida moms obsessed with true crime. From infamous cases like Ellen Greenberg to shocking Florida stories like the Dan Markel killing.
With 55 million downloads, we bring you new deep dives every Tuesday and Thursday.
Listen to Moms and Mysteries on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Goodbye, Kyle!
Did the sound of those words call to you like Pavlov's dog? Then you might enjoy our podcast, Turtle Time.
Every week, you can join me, Riley Hamilton, and my co-host, Amy Scarlotta, as we cover the most pressing Bravo news and dig into the new episodes to answer important questions like, who the hell is Adrian Malouf in this world?
Listen to Turtle Time on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes every Wednesday and Friday.
Back in San Francisco on the West Coast, how did you first discover mods?
Oh, I know. The only way I heard about mods is because I went to this bar in New York, and everyone said, if you ever make it to San Francisco, you need to know there's a bar called Mod Study. You need to go there. I went there in 1967, but because you had to be 21 to go into the bar, I sat across the street. I had to wait like 2 years, literally, to turn legally 21 to go into that bar. And it was on my 21st birthday, November 2nd, whatever year that would have been. I went into mods for the first time in my life, and it was extraordinary. If you remember when you first walk into mods, you look exactly to the left. There's those seats. That's exactly where I sat. I didn't go into the main part of mod. I sat there in that little section right there, nice and safe. And that window was not there. That was all covered over. But I sat there, and I think I ordered a drink, and all gay men worked at that bar, because in 1967 or 69, whatever year I ended up going into the bar, what would I be, 21? Unless you owned that bar, women could not be bartenders. That was the ABC law. So all the men we got to be at the bar came from the Castro. They were all gay men. And I said, I'm here for my 21st birthday. He said, let me buy you a drink for your 21st birthday. That was my first introduction to mods, thinking, I feel like welcome here. Another thing I think about mods, because, I was really struck by something else. I had gone to a lesbian bar when I turned 18 down in New York City. And when I went down to that bar in New York City, it was like really dark, some dark alley. But you could be 18, you go in, it's dark, you get carded, you couldn't barely see anyone. And it just seemed like an odd place to kind of go. But so to go from that at 18 and go to San Francisco, where you walk in, you got some gay men behind the bars, they buy you a drink, and it's owned by a lesbian, Ricky Stryker. That was extraordinary. But the most extraordinary thing, they were open from 12 noon to 2 in the morning every day. I said, broad daylight? Yeah, broad daylight in San Francisco. And then once I got in there, you began to know about the Castro. They had 12 lesbian bars open at that point, 12. And a lot of them, San Francisco's not big. So when you think about Ricky Stryker, she was really about the community. It wasn't just having a bar you can go get a drink and, whatever. Yeah, and then it became home. Maud's became home for me. Home meaning that if you didn't have any place to go on a Thanksgiving, Ricky Stryker would have a meal at that bar. And Ricky oftentimes would say, if anyone wants to be a bartender, we can train you. And I had the good fortune of ending up to be a bartender at Maud's for a while. And then when she opened up Amelia's, I got to be a bartender and a manager at Amelia's. But also the reality check about bars like Maud's, they weren't predominantly gay and lesbians of color at all. You had to go to the East Bay to get some folk that were like, people like Pat Parker and some others. This might be more of a class issue within the gay and lesbian thing in one way. Because almost you had like 12 different lesbian bars. None of them were specifically people of color, none of them, but they all welcomed you. But in the lesbian community, it was more, they were just lucky to have you as a lesbian. But that was not true on Castro Street. Castro Street, even back in the day, found out they prefer white gay men. Can I just put those cards on the table? And so if you were Black or, Latinx or whatever as gay men, you might find you could see how they could change that. Harvey Milk was a game changer. It was one thing to try to impact City Hall by knowing a council member or showing up. But when you have someone run and win, and so for Harvey Milk to run, understanding, so you cannot have this many people in the city of San Francisco, whether they're going in bars or going and shopping and buying homes, without someone representing you on city council. That was a game changer. And that happened with folk of color and women as well. The same thing happened. But for a lot of people, it was like we didn't realize until he got murdered with the mayor, who was very, very sympathetic. That was probably the most game-changing moment in the history of that city and the country, when they both got brutally murdered. Like, why does it take those horror moments to make people think, oh my gosh, what are we thinking? And then think about how that is. I'm getting chills about it now and what's happening now. But that was all kind of collectively connected. Up until that happened, the lesbian communities were great amongst the lesbian community. The gay men were great among gay men community. I think up until that moment, we all thought we're doing good. And was there any particular reason why we had to go to the gay men's bar? No shade, no, because we had our own bars. But I remember when word went out, and I know exactly where I was. I was living on not far on 14th Street, and it came on the news. The first thing everyone said, everyone's to meet at the corner of Castro and Market and bring a candle. We were going to walk in silence in honor of Harvey and the mayor. And, it's not that far. You could walk from Castro and Market down to City Hall. And Holly Near was there, and she started singing this incredible song.
We are gentle and brave people, and we are singing for our lives.
And I remember when we got to the corner of Castro and Market, that we all met, we said, what have we been thinking? Why have we been so separated? It was probably one of the most dramatic moments. And to get to City Hall and hear Holly sing that song. And then we all got to go back home. And then it was just, of course, who did what, when, and where, and what does that all mean? But then to hear about how Harvey Milk, the man stood in front of him and shot him point blank. Point blank. And Moscone, point blank. You can't live without knowing that moment and day. And even now, they honor and commemorate that. Yeah. And here's another interesting story. I was working at the Warri Sisters League. Remember the kidnapping of Patty Hearst? When I was working at the Warri Sisters League, we had our office in 833 Haight Street on Haight Street. One day, I come in and the person behind the bar says, Mandy, the FBI was looking for you. And I said, in a good way, wait a minute, the FBI is looking for me? And I was thinking of the FBI, War Resisters League, something about, no, we weren't embarrassed about getting arrested. I thought it was the war in Vietnam. No, they said, there's a gentleman, please call. And I called and he said, I need to figure out a way to have a conversation with you. And I need to come down to your office, 833 Haight Street. And then he came, and you know what it was? You had several lesbians who were part of the people who kidnapped Patty Hearst. And I still have his card. And this is the most bizarre thing in the world. Whatever that group was, they all got killed in this big fire they had at whatever the headquarters were down in L.A. My mind's full now, but I remember when he came to me, what he wanted to know was I willing to go undercover to be a part of whatever this group was that helped kidnap Patty Hearst. I kid you not. I kid you not. I still have the actual card, and it's in my one of my calendars. And I almost did it. And this is why. A good friend of mine said, Mandy, what world are you living in? Absolutely not. And I told her why. I thought, I have no parents. I was like, left, and I could understand, Patty Hearst and the Hearst family circumstance. And I said, I almost said, no, don't do it. I decided not to, but that's how close I came. But that's also how they were infiltrating the peace movement, the women's movement. They always had someone. I mean, it was just the most amazing thing. I cannot make this up, and I'm telling you honestly. And I am saying no. And then only to find out like a week later when they all got caught down in L.A. and they all got killed in there was some kind of a raid or something, whatever. And that could have been me. It could have been anybody. But I think, I think about that.
So you're working with the War Resisters League. You get a job offer to move to Durham, North Carolina.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about, so our first interview of this season was Michelle Crone.
Yes.
All about Seneca,
Yep.
Seneca Women's Peace Encampment.
Yep.
And this is how you come together with Michelle, right? So
Right.
you find out about Seneca and organize a
Women's Peace Walk.
women's peace walk from Durham to Seneca.
We heard about Seneca because of the Greenham Common. Does that ring a bell, Greenham Common?
We have 2 episodes on Greenham, yeah.
Yes. And because we heard about that, we said, oh my gosh, that combines cultural stuff, anti-war. We said, well, we're living in the South where all these military bases. How could we replicate that in a way that we could make it more smaller? And then literally, how many miles can we walk a day? And we had a vehicle, and we had a friend of ours who was riding on the passenger side, and we only could do about 30 miles a day. And we'd break that up. Start first thing in the morning, 6 in the morning, and then before the sun would go down. And we would know in advance, Sarah, where we were going to stop, had it all figured out, where people could sleep. Some had cabins, some didn't, some had tents. Some people could sleep in the vehicle, like I did a lot in the vehicle.
And so you're gathering people along the way.
And we put out a call.
So can you estimate how many people you started with in Durham?
3.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
And then how many people were there with you around when you got to Seneca?
I want to say at least, now remember, we weren't the only ones doing that Women's Peace Walk. There were several other feeders that happened at the same time.
All coming together at Seneca.
That was
that's so cool. How many people ended up there?
I think I want to say about 1,500 maybe. Some people said I can go the whole way. A lot of people only wanted to do it through the walk of where they lived. And we would stay in touch with each other to have like a master or mistress list, if I can use that term. And it took us a month to get up there. And we literally drove back. We got home the same day. I was almost like, yeah, that was neat.
Oh, really?
And how I met Michelle, I was just going to tell you. I met Michelle because we were doing concert productions. And at one point, Michelle and I were talking about, well, what if we ended up doing our own festival, open to everyone? What if? And we know each other just as friends. She was born in Albany. I was born in Albany. So we had that as friends. And then she said, well, Mandy, what about, I have an idea. What do you think about if we started our own festival, not make it big? And in Michigan, we don't want to compete with Michigan because that was the biggest one at the time. But we wanted to make, this is the name of the festival, Rhythm Fest, a women's music festival of music and politics, because no one wanted to talk about social justice issues. Remember, music and politics, that was the very first one in 1990. And then we had to start looking for artists that would be willing to do that. And we got a Girl Scout camp right here in North Carolina on the edge, right here. And we thought, well, Girl Scouts, in fact, Girl Scouts were the first one, not the Boy Scouts. Remember, Girl Scouts were the first one we can drop the idea of America. They were the first ones said, well, we can welcome lesbians, no problem. Because NOW had the same problem, national organization. And they said, yeah, you're all welcome here. And we just happened to find a camp that 2 lesbians owned. And they said, oh my gosh, yeah, we would welcome you here. They had cabins, or you can put up tents. You can sleep outside. We wanted to do little workshops. They could have a place where you do your meals. The first one only had, think about maybe 300 or 400. It was great. And people said they'd love that model. But then it just grabbed, Sarah. Part of it was because each artist had their own unique group. They would do workshops. They would have these wonderful opportunities where if you were a musician, you could join in. We would have like hours of silence with the Quaker tradition. We would start every workshop with maybe 20 or 30 minutes of silence. We had ASL interpreters. Very few ASL interpreters back in those days that could do women's music stuff. We got those, and that word went out. So it kind of build. And I think the largest one we have was maybe 1,500. And we wanted to be intentionally biracial and intentionally Quakers. And that's how we started Rhythm Fest.
So then I feel like there's a whole journey that you go on politically that starts with Jesse Helms, right? And so can you explain who he was as a figure, what made him so controversial to those that might not know?
But Jesse Helms, long before the war in Vietnam, was one of the staunchest segregationists that walked. Remember, in the South, you had a whole no Black people can vote, no people of color can vote. And think about women. He also had some connections with the Klan. But Jesse Helms, he was born and raised in North Carolina. And we knew before I'd even moved here, because of the War Resisters League and the American Friends Service, we already knew his record on people of color.
He keeps getting reelected. Like, he's in office for a very long time.
Yeah.
He has a track record against people of color, obviously.
And women.
And then with the AIDS crisis.
He saw an opportunity. And he got a lot of churches involved, and a lot of Black churches were willing to say, who didn't like gay, I'm not going to touch that, don't let me. Silence is the voice of complicity.
So in 1990, you become a big part of this campaign and trying to stop the re-election of Jesse Helms.
Stop the election, and at the same time, support and organize for the Democrat, Harvey Gantt. And Harvey Gantt, because he also was very welcoming, but because the American Friends Service Committee had no problem, other groups said, we're not going to go near that issue. We're not going to touch that. Whether it was women or no, we don't want to go near that gay thing. And they said, no, we welcome that.
Yeah. So can you explain what happened with the hands ad, the advertisement for the Helms campaign?
Oh, I know what it was. It was here in North Carolina. There was like white hands. And it said, you needed that job, but they had to give it to a minority, or so the white hands were basically saying, but because of race, you're out of luck because of race, because these Black people, these Negroes want to take your job. And that's how we got the white hands ad. And that had a huge impact.
I mean, you and I know that you lose the race in 90, you lose it in 96, but you've talked about how through the campaign, you're still able to build this like infrastructure in that area that didn't, or at least build it up.
Yeah.
And you've called these Senate races the Stonewall in the South.
Right. Because sometimes, how do you define a win? How do you define at the moment, literally at the moment of the time of those votes that happened, and he kept on winning. But at some point, when you look at it in another context of like in the long run, that might have happened on those specific dates and times. But how has that influenced where we are now? And because of where we are now, that's a whole game changer. And then you have to kind of back it up and said, what would you need to do for that to not even happen in the first place? But that's where we are.
Right. You've said that the problem in those races, or one of the main problems, was the Black and gay communities not being able to come together.
Yes.
Like the respective racism and homophobia within those two groups was insurmountable at the time.
At the time. That can be applied anywhere, by the way, which I think is important. But we ended up finding ways to collectivize, organize, and that ended up being a model because people were tired of just the SDS, blowing up this or whatever it might be.
So let's go back because I know that once you move to Durham and you go to get a driver's license, that's when you start to learn more about your family history.
Yeah.
So let's get into all that.
Well, I have to thank my good time friend Judy Penhider, who I've known. I mean, Judy Penhider I met through the War Resisters League West. I mean, she's been one of my longtime friends. Said, "Hey, Mandy, I'll be more than glad to check on that for you," and she did. And then when she gave me my first, whatever that thing is called, and I looked and said, "Mother." Remember, I didn't know who my mother was. I knew my father, Leroy, and it said, Madeline Carter, birthplace, Edenton, North Carolina. I couldn't believe it. And then it tells all about her and how many kids she had and her mother. And then I wanted to get into it. I said, I want to go. And I drove to Edenton, North Carolina, and found the house where she lives. So all the places where all the farming happened. And then I went down to the, if you want to get more thing on family, you have to go down to the courthouse. And then you ask for more information. And I went down to the courthouse and I was asking information about Emma B. Privet. And then the person behind the desk said, "Do you want to know about the black Privets or the white Privets?" Hello. Because it's along the slave route. Edenton, North Carolina is the oldest city in the state of North Carolina. Why? Because that's slave plantation land. And when she asked me that question, I said, well, certainly the black Privets. Well, normally you'll take the name of the slaveholders. So the Privets, that's not really their name from Africa, but they took the name of the slaveholders, the Privets. Once I got that paperwork and I saw where our birth mother was born, I have to be honest about this. She was still alive when I found out where she was living in South Carolina. She was still alive. I could have went down and asked her face to face, "Why did you give us up?" And I didn't. And I could have done it with my father, and I didn't. No. It was just too much trauma. But I know where she's buried, and I know where her graveyard is, and I know where our father is buried and where his graveyard is, and that's part of my journey. I'm going to do that. But if you ask anyone, the trauma was just too much. I could have found, but they could have also found us if they really wanted to. They didn't. So, what do you do with that?
And this whole time, you have no idea where your siblings are.
No, at the time.
And when do you start to track down
I started looking for my brother. Remember when I moved here to get a job at the War Resisters League in 1982, I went ahead and got on Ancestry.com. And Judy has always been intrigued with Ancestry.com. So when I got my paperwork, I said, "Judy, you won't believe this. I have this piece of paper that tells me where my brother was born, where my mother was born." I'm going to make the long story. She said, "I'll do you a favor, Mandy. I'll help get on Ancestry.com with you." And she did. At some point, we lost track with each other. And then all of a sudden, she said, "Mandy, I just went back on Ancestry.com because I found your brother because he's on Ancestry.com too." It was the first time he was on there. And she said, "I want to send you the info. You can decide if you want to be in touch with him." And I had his information. Now, I need to tell you something. Ronnie and I got along with my brother Ronnie when we were living in that black foster home. And even though I had to leave and got shipped to Schenectady at the age of 12, when I saw his email and I saw I could email him, I knew I felt comfortable. And you won't believe this. When I emailed him, he wrote back and said, "Mandy, I can't believe you're contacting me." And I said, "Can I find a way to not only call you, but can I Zoom you?" And he said, and I have to tell you, he came up and I'm telling you, I didn't cry. We just picked up the conversation like we did if I had been 12 years old. That was the power of that conversation. It was like, "Ronnie." He said, "Mandy." And the first thing I said, "What did they tell you? What did the Menassees tell you why I had to leave?" I said, "Ronnie, what did they tell you?" And he said, "Because you didn't want to be here anymore." And for the first time in 59 years, I said, "Ronnie, they lied to you. They said you didn't want to be here anymore. That's a lie. We lived with that for 59 years. That wasn't a reason. For him to live with that lie, that is just so wrong." And then I said, "Let's pick up the conversation where we were when I last saw you at 12, and that's what we've been doing." It is that powerful. And I felt like that. Then I found out 2 quick stories. I found out, he aged out at 18, but he wanted to go to college, and he actually applied and got accepted to one of these, kind of like tech schools or something. But then he got the draft notice. And then he said, what am I going to do? And then he did something extraordinary. He lied and said, I'm gay. And I said, I'm sorry, what did you just say? He said, the way I got out of the draft is I lied and said I was gay. And I said, Ronnie, you have no idea about the coincidences of life, because I am an out lesbian, have been since, the day I met. He said, Mandy, I can't believe that we were having this. And look, what's the chances of that?
And so what about Dolores?
We can't find Dolores. We don't know if she's dead or alive. We're trying to find her. At one point, when I got my paperwork, it says she ended up living in Los Angeles, California. We had the actual address. We don't know how to find her.
Okay, so what is it that we know about Dolores? Like, what information do we have about Dolores that might help us find her as far as right now?
Well, the most important part, she stayed in touch with our father after we couldn't stay in touch with our father, Leroy Carter. And she ended up going with him up to Youngstown, Ohio. I'm sorry, Youngstown. She ended up going up there with him. But then we lost track because we don't know where she went after our father died. And we haven't figured out. And there's a lot of Carters, and we don't know how to reach her.
And so we think she was using the last name Carter, or was she using...
Well, that's just it. She might have got married. And I think her middle name was connected to our mother, our birth mother. But if she got married, we don't know. And if she didn't get married, or is she in common law, don't know. But we're working on that now.
So what we know is that her name was at one point Dolores Carter, and her last known location was Youngstown, Ohio.
Yes.
And where was she born?
Albany, New York. Because remember, the three of us were,
You're
Albany.
all born in Albany, New York. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, if anyone listening has any insight, of course, reach out to us, and we're going to try to do a push on social media also to see if we can find Dolores.
I would appreciate that, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I've been wanting to do that for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you have, like, your political history is endless, right? Like, we could talk so long about Obama in the DNC and all the things that you've been a part of. Obviously, I think of you as this really radical activist, and in a lot of ways, you mirror Michelle Crone in some ways. But a big difference is that you've spent a lot of time working within the system. Like working on campaigns and working with the DNC. And I'm curious, like, do you consider yourself an anarchist? Do you consider yourself like anti-US government, or do you, it's more nuanced than that? So where do you get your sort of opinion on working within the system and how you feel about, like, the U.S. government in general? Like, where does that all land for you?
That's another good one. These are really good.
Thank you.
I think, it's interesting. I was sitting here thinking about a couple of other movements that replicate what you're asking me. And one of them was, remember how the women had to get the right to vote? Remember that? That wasn't given to us. And so some women said, what if? And so you had those initial women who were part of the suffrage movement saying, well, if we are opposed to war and all the men are being called up to war, what influence could we have on the men, both personally, that's my son, that's my father, that's my cousin, and then most importantly, when you think about all the wars we've been involved in, not in this country, but everywhere else, then the question came, what King asked and some other people, why are we sending our brothers, husbands, whatever, to a war thousands of miles away that has nothing to do with us, in which people will kill or be killed in the name of democracy? That's not democracy, little d. And then we said, well, then there's also the political parties that we know, Republican Party and Democratic Party. But the one thing that these two parties believe in, if it ain't our kids, let's send these other people over there and they can be the ones who get killed and murdered in the name of democracy.
Do you think of the Democratic Party as also kind of like a war machine?
Oh, absolutely.
Or do you think of
absolutely.
Yes.
And Republicans.
But right. How do you reckon with all of the different ways that you've worked for the DNC and with the DNC? while also feeling like in so many ways they're not aligned with really like Quakers, Quakers and all of these values that are oppositional to that.
And I'm glad you asked that, because that's the amazing struggle going on this very second as we have this conversation, where you have a huge divide, not just women. We don't want to do war. Why are we going to go to war? Don't do wars. And we have models of where people have said not only to do war, not to support war, but how do I individually remove myself in the institutions that supports the institution of war? And that's when you get into colleges. That's when you get into women's studies. And when you realize that I might be a part of, or there's a way that I can be a part of, not to continue on with this militarization or with this institutionalization.
But why work with the DNC rather than against it?
Who's the party that has anything to do with who's going to be in office? The Democratic National Committee. Same thing with Republicans. They are the people who literally put people in office. And unless you have someone to say, not only do we not agree with that, but also try to get people in to talk about how we might find other ways, the solution than murdering people and starving people in order to make it a model. That is, and it happens right now, every day.
I feel like if there's any takeaway from this for like the modern movement, it's anti-individualist.
It's also collaboration.
Right.
It's collaboration. It's collective. Right here in Durham, in fact, there was something going on. There was like 3 different people that do, what's that service you get on a car and drive around? Uber, whatever that thing is. Someone said, no, why are we doing that? If we're in this particular neighborhood, well, like even neighborhood associations, if you live in Moore Hill Health Association, they now have a wonderful Facebook page in which you can go on there. How's the weather? I need someone to do some ironing. I need someone to do... And that model is like everyone, we can just do that. And colleges now, because you can then have this wonderful town gown dynamic. And a lot of colleges have to have you do like local in order to get credit. And it's not because I have to do it or I want to compete with you. It's like, how do we collaborate? And it's great. And that, Sarah, to me, is like, I think that's the direction we're going in.
Thanks for listening to Cruising. If you like this episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star review. It really helps others discover our podcast. Cruising is produced by a small but mighty team of 3 queer women, Rachel Karp, Jen McGinnity, and me, your host and editor, Sarah Gabrielli. Our theme song is by Joey Freeman. You can support us at buymeacoffee.com/cruisingpod. Follow us on social media at cruisingpod, on Substack, cruisingpod.substack.com, and at our website, www.cruisingpod.com.
Hi, I'm Brandy Basanti. For the last 15 years, I've starred on one of the most successful reality shows of all time, Story Tours. On my new show, The Real Reality, my guest and I will reveal the real story of what it's like navigating fame and notoriety. Because it's my show, I can do whatever I want. I can say whatever I want. No filters, no rules, no network executives. And I believe that's what the world wants. Raw, real, authentic, and I'm gonna fucking give it to you. Though success is great, being in the public eye can come at a cost. Oftentimes, what you see on camera is not the real reality. On each episode of my show, we'll sit down with a different notable individual from the world of TV, film, sports, or internet fame. We will explore their unique story, what really happened on and off camera, how becoming famous has truly impacted their lives, and what their vision is for their future. In a world obsessed with celebrity, followers, and subscribers, the true story is often lost or even buried. This show will reveal what really happened. This show will reveal what people really felt. This show will reveal what fame is really like. This is The Real Reality. Subscribe now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Reality TV is messy.
Pop culture is louder than ever.
And the internet
completely unhinged.
Welcome to Roxanne
and Chantel,
the podcast where cousins Roxanne and Chantel break down reality TV, celebrity drama, and the stories everyone's texting about.
We recap the shows,
spill the headlines,
and sit down with the stars themselves.
No filter,
no boring takes,
just the tea.
New episodes every week.
If it's trending,
we're talking about it.
This is Roxanne
and Chantel.
Let's get into it.